everyone. On today's show, we have an incredible guest. His name's Walter Haydock. He's currently the CEO of StackAware, a cyber risk communications platform. Walter's an author. He's a consultant. He's a ghostwriter in the cyberspace. He's also a former U.S. Marine, U.S. Naval Academy graduate, also graduated from Harvard Business School. And honestly, volumes could be and probably should be written about what Robert's doing for the cyber community. And I'm just delighted to have you on the show today, Robert. Walter. So we were going to have Robert, but Walter, I'm delighted to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason that I got in touch with Walter was because he has a really exciting new course that he is putting together with Robert Wood, who is currently the CISO at CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also the co-founder of the Soft Side of Cyber. And Walter and Robert together are putting together a program that is going to help us kind of super boost our productivity with AI without boosting our blood pressure, in having to deal with cyber risk. So, Walter, could you tell us a little bit about that? What's going on with this?
Yeah, sure. So, as everyone who's been paying attention to technology in the past 6 or so months has noticed, there have been a lot of advancements in AI. And obviously, this has been the culmination, of a lot of development that's been going on for decades, but it's really kind of breaking through into the mainstream with the release of ChatGPT. The ability to use natural language to interact with AI models is a game changer, and we're going to see this, really rapidly expand in terms of usage throughout every type of organization. So with any new technology, there are always risks involved. I mean, if we didn't want any cyber risk, then we would just stop using technology. We'd shut everything down. We'd go back to the Stone Age. Boom, no cybersecurity risk. So obviously, that's not something we can do, and it's not something we want to do. Unfortunately, I've seen with generative AI in particular, a lot of security people have been viewing it as there's that quotation, Arthur C. Clarke, who says, any form of technology sufficiently advanced enough will appear to be magic. And, there are some people who are treating generative AI kind of like magic, like black magic. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to, deal with the risk associated. And I think that there is a middle path. There is a way to use these technologies effectively, securely, while also complying with data privacy regulations and existing compliance frameworks. And that's what we're jumping into in this course. That's what we're going to cover.
Oh man, that sounds so awesome. We kind of just jumped right into what you're doing there. So you have a really interesting background, Walter. Really impressive background. Can you tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you got into cyber in the first place and why that was so interesting to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career as a Marine Corps officer, and I was on the infantry and intelligence side, and wasn't especially technical at that point, but I found myself hacking together spreadsheets and doing all sorts of kind of ad hoc ways of processing data to support ongoing operations. And you may or may not know this, but the military is pretty conservative when it comes to allowing new technology. So Excel was kind of a big deal to be able to use that. And I continued on in government. I worked in the intelligence community, and then I worked on Capitol Hill as a staffer, and actually helped write some legislation with respect to data governance and privacy in the Department of Homeland Security, and really developed an understanding, later in life that, I think the next frontier of security would be in cyberspace, and decided to really educate myself and go deep on the topic when I was about almost turning 30 years old. So that's when I started learning how to code, was when I was a full-fledged adult, and that was a painful process, but I learned a ton. And while at business school, I, kind of accelerated my learning development, and decided I wanted to go into the software world, and ended up landing a job at a pretty big software company focused on the cybersecurity aspects of a product that they were offering. It was an Internet of Things platform that obviously has a lot of cybersecurity considerations, considering it can interact with cyber physical systems. And spent a couple of years there, and then I moved on to another enterprise software company that was itself, it was a security vendor, and realized that I was facing similar problems at multiple different organizations. So I decided that it was time to go out and solve those problems myself directly by launching my own company. And I've been documenting a lot of the journey along the way with my blog, Deploying Securely.
Yeah, man. And it's if for anybody who is listening, if you're not following Walter Haydock on LinkedIn, you're missing out. He has fantastic content. So I want to dive into some of those problems. Oh, but first off, I got to give you a little shout because Excel, I feel like that's like one of my first loves, right? I wrote, like I built the prototype for Paramify using Excel, and it worked awesome as long as I was the one doing it. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's great.
Not great
But
for collaboration, but it's
no,
good for
no, no,
MVPs.
no. Yeah, absolutely. Good enough, right? Sometimes. I thought it was good enough, and a couple other people did, right? So, um, anyway, Walter, tell me a little bit. You mentioned the problems that you ran into in those big organizations, and I've been reading a lot of the stuff, and I'm having PTSD as I like read some of the things that you write about because kind of have a similar background in cyber, right? So, tell me a little bit about those problems.
Yeah, I think at a high level, the biggest
Yeah.
problem that I faced in a variety of organizations with customers, with vendors, is communicating about risk in a clear and concise manner. So, in my experience, and this even goes back to my Marine Corps days, there are really only four ways to manage risk: accept, mitigate, transfer, and avoid. And sometimes, I find myself in meetings where uh, people would kind of be going down rabbit holes, talking about options, and it was really important to bring it back to those four pathways you can take and understand, which one you're going to choose, or which combination are you going to choose in a given situation. And I found that the most effective way to do that is to speak quantitatively. And that's what I've tried to do with not only vulnerability management, but now with generative AI risk, looking at how models will perform in certain circumstances. What are the odds of data loss occurring when using these tools, and how you can present these findings, these risk assessments, in a way to auditors and external assessors and customers, to make sure that they have buy-in in the process. So that's what I've been focused on.
Great. Yeah. And so, in your experience, when you're presenting, quantitative risk or quantitative results or of whatever you're trying to assess, right, from a risk perspective, do you find it? You say that it's easier to get people to understand the quantitative analysis versus, I don't know, more subjective analysis. Can you give us a couple examples of like where that's effective for you?
Yeah, yeah. So maybe I misspoke. I would say that it's potentially not easier to understand quantitative things. And in fact, security teams often gravitate to qualitative descriptions. They like heat maps, red, yellow,
Hi.
green, stoplights, high, medium, low, bands, those types of things. And I find myself running into a ton of resistance whenever I say, I hear you, that you need your band of high, medium, low, or high, medium, or critical, high, medium, low, or most critical, critical, high, medium, low. But that it's something of a crutch, I would say, in the security community. And if you read some of the material out there by Richard Searson, and some of those folks who've done real deep dives on how those qualitative communication methods can actually lead you astray. I think that's revealing. But some examples of quantitative risk management that you can talk about is, the currency of risk, whether people want to admit it or not, is dollars, because that's what businesses use to. That's how they evaluate projects. That's how they decide whether they're going to undertake a new initiative, release a new product, things of that nature. And even the government, even the public sector, the military, it's funny, the military, it's not the biggest source of expenditure in our government, but it's pretty close up there. But the military, the Department of Defense can't pass an audit, but they've got over $800 billion in budget. But still, people in the military or public sector will recoil against talking about risk management in dollar terms. But I would say, if you're telling me what we have is not enough, then we're going to need some better justification for why we're going to spend more on certain programs and policies and things like that. So talking about risk in terms of dollars, I think, is the most important first step you can take. I've got other examples, other ways to get there, but that's kind of the first step of the process.
I agree, right? Like that. For the most part, if you are talking about improving security, there has to be some sort of financial outcome, especially when you're talking to developers, right? We really need them. We need people to implement security. I mean, if you just have the GRC people implementing security, you're not going to have security. And it's really important that you get them incentivized and get them on your side. And so it sounds like what you're trying to say is that if you can convince them that this has some sort of financial impact for the organization, then it's easier to get them. It's easier to get them on your side, right? Implementing security.
Yeah, certainly from a business leader perspective, I'll give the example. If a chief revenue officer came into a meeting with the CEO and said, I think our revenue is going to be low this quarter, the CEO would not accept that as an answer and would say, what do you mean? How low is it going to be? Are we going to be 10% under plan, 50% under plan? And unfortunately, I think CISOs can kind of walk into a room and throw around a bunch of technical jargon and then say, and this is high risk, and people will not drill down into those statements. And I think that's unfortunate because it leaves the business leaders not really fully understanding, and in some cases not wanting to understand, not being interested in understanding what the magnitude of the risk is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. So you're not going to get any budget for security unless it's tied to revenue in some way, at least on the commercial side, which is really kind of this whole pursuit of stickers, right? Like compliance, right? I get a SOC 2 sticker. I get a FedRAMP sticker. I get an ISO 27001 sticker. Some people say some compliance is better than no compliance. I'm not really sure, though, because of the trust that is associated with getting SOC 2. So you certainly can kind of go through the motions and just do something, but I don't really know what I think about it yet in total. I think you just definitely have to have some sort of incentive to implement security, and it's a challenge I think that we'll always struggle with unless we have really great mechanisms, easy mechanisms for implementing security. And so I think that's kind of what you're trying to do, right? With this new course, it's everybody is going to want to use AI. You can't tell them you can't use it. So when we're thinking about building a mental model for how to be thinking about AI, how to use it securely, I know that you'll go into the details in your course, which, we'll have those in the show notes right? When we release, so that you can get this course. But tell us a little bit about how to build a mental model for how to think about AI and security in like the easiest way possible.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely a fair question. So what I would start with is I'm actually about to release a free AI risk management standard operating procedure as a lead magnet for our course. So I'll just use that model as a way to describe how I would assess AI risk. So first of all, I would start by looking at the business problem you're trying to tackle, and this is something a business leader needs to answer. And the question would be, do we need an AI tool for this business problem to solve this issue? And you know, you better have a better answer than just yes. And if you drill down and say why, the answer can't be, oh, because I want a fancy AI tool and I'm hearing about it a lot on social media. So, you need to clear that initial hurdle and understand what business problem you're solving rather than I just want AI. Assuming you've done that, I'd say then the next step you need to look at is what sort of data is this tool going to be processing? So an obvious thing to look for is any sort of personal data. If you look at the new GDPR, it's got a pretty broad definition of what personal data is. A work email address that contains your name is personal data according to the GDPR. So you might think that, oh, well, we're just, this is just an internal tool. We're just using it to, send emails internally or something like that. Well, you're actually processing personal data, as it turns out, according to the GDPR. So you'll need to understand what compliance, what data privacy regimes you're going to be touching on first before you, or as you begin your risk assessment process, and then you're going to need to make sure you understand, what sort of changes do I need to make to my operations? Do I need to update my privacy policy? What's our method for responding to data subject access requests? If somebody says they want to purge their data from this tool, if we're using a third-party tool, how does the vendor address these types of things? How do we extract all that data out of their systems if we get a DSAR from one of our customers or even from one of our own employees? So just understanding what types of data you're going to be processing with the tool is really important. So once you've established that, you'll understand what regulatory guardrails you have in place, and then you can kind of move on to the cybersecurity analysis. And you have two options here. First of all, you could say, hey, we're really technically savvy and we're going to host this model ourselves. We've got homegrown code. We're going to run it in whatever environment, or you can use a vendor. You can use a third party that has a hosted solution. So each of these has its own challenges. A lot of security people that I've interacted with have expressed a preference for locally hosted models, and because they want full control over their data. And to me, that can be puzzling in a couple different ways. So for example, say you're running this on, you're running the model on Google Colab, which is just a data science tool set that you can run all sorts of stuff on. And I've done this in companies. Yes, I can delete things. That I can control where the data goes, but you're probably going to have some sort of persistence for that data. Is that sitting on Google Cloud Platform? Well, okay, now a third party has control of your data. Just because you're running the model yourself doesn't mean that a third party doesn't have access to your data. Now, of course, it's a big company and they're well-established kind of contracts in terms of handling that information, but you still are trusting a third party with it, unless you're running like a bare metal server in your own data center with an LLM on it, which conceivably could be appropriate for ultra sensitive use cases like military's using it for classified information. Then I could see that happening, but otherwise that's going to be kind of a strange deployment model. And also you need to understand, like, are you the most capable of evaluating or maintaining the security of this setup? Like, are you going to set up all the pipelines? How are you going to, deal with outages? Are you going to configure it correctly? There's some data that I think Gartner said that 99% of all cloud security misconfigurations are going to be the customer's fault by 2025. So if you're setting up all these resources, think hard about how you're going to administer them from a security perspective. If you go the third party route, then you're going to be negotiating with an organization that, they'll have varying degrees of security attestations. If you look at OpenAI, they've got a SOC 2 type 2, and they've got an API that you can plug things into. They've got a pretty explicit data retention policy. Microsoft Azure has using the same models as OpenAI, not their technology, but aside from the model, they're using the Azure stack. They've got even more fine-grained controls. You can opt out of some of the monitoring of the model for highly sensitive use cases, and you can also use customer managed keys in those scenarios. So understanding exactly the sensitivity of the data you're dealing with, and then adjusting the controls appropriately is really critical. I'll pause there because I've been talking for a while, but I'm happy to continue on.
No, it's great, man. I love it. Right. So it sounds like, yeah, it really depends on your organization, right? So some companies are going to say, hey, let's just use OpenAI because, it's really hard to keep people from using that, right? It's really hard to keep people from using just all of these AI tools because they're so useful and they really do boost productivity, right? So scripts that used to take like, I just did one the other day, right? Things that probably would have taken me, a day or two, to kind of script out, you can do literally, you get a start on it in Python, like just, in 30 minutes, and you have a working script and you're getting the data you want. It's so incredibly useful. And so, it's just really hard to keep people from using that. So, you talked about we could kind of have an on-prem model. We could have it, if you are in GCP, you're using the tools that they give you. So you have on-prem, and you just have all of the machine learning algorithms or the language learning modules just on-prem, and then you have just a third party. And so what are you seeing as the viable alternatives to each? So if I'm a small company, right? If I'm a small company, I don't want to do on-prem. I want to do cloud, right? Can I use that securely, right? Can I use OpenAI securely?
Yeah, you definitely can. And like you pointed out, there are productivity gains to be had that are really going to be, irresistible for smaller organizations that don't have resources otherwise. So you're going to need to figure out a way to do it, specifically with the OpenAI API or even ChatGPT. There's some important things you should have in place even at a smaller organization. So first of all, you should have a policy about what sort of data you provide to these types of tools. You should opt out of data sharing or of training on your data with ChatGPT. That's something you can do. It requires an opt out rather than an opt in for the training, which is the opposite model for the API if you're using the user interface. So if you're doing anything that could be potentially sensitive, you'll want to use the OpenAI API because they have a 30-day data retention period, barring any sort of kind of illegal activity. So that's a relatively good window to retain data. Obviously, for security purposes, you wouldn't want the data retained at all on the other end, but they have certain obligations that they need to comply with. And some other things you can do is before entering data into the AI tool, whether it's, we'll use ChatGPT as an example, you can you can use pre-processing tools. So for example, I launched an open source project called GPT Guard that you can use to strip out anything that looks like an IP address, anything that looks like a name, anything that looks like a credential. You can strip that out of the data and just put in placeholders before you send it to the AI tool, and that will allow you to reduce your risk exposure. But in the end, if a user wants to do something like send a credential or lots of PII to an AI tool, there's not going to be too much you can do about it. So making sure that the users understand the consequences of that, and like you said, they're going to use it one way or the other. So making sure they know how to use it securely is going to be your first line of defense.
Yeah, I'm thinking about kind of, like 15 years ago, implementing a DLP for a company, like, the data loss prevention system. And it was looking for stuff like that all the time. And I'm like, there's no way this is going to work. Because it's just so hard, man. You, at the end of the day, you just have people, and that's why you have, within FedRAMP, you have like rules of engagement where everybody has to sign it, with DocuSign, and they have to sign it every year. And basically, where you don't have a technical control in place, the controls you're describing, in my view, a lot has to go right. A lot has to go right, and I think you can probably do it, but ultimately, it's going to come to those policies, right, and educating people, because any control can be circumvented. Right? I don't know.
Yeah, 100%, and your people are the ones who are going to be doing the productive work. So making sure that they understand why they shouldn't do certain things is incredibly important. So, maybe somebody in marketing who just dumps the entire CRM into ChatGPT is just trying to do his or her job. He's just trying to get get an analysis done, get a product for his manager. So, if you explain that, oh, well, we don't want to share all this customer data with OpenAI, and if we do, we need to update our data processing addendum and things like that. Then that person in marketing might say, okay, I get it. Like maybe I'll take an extra second to like remove this cell from the spreadsheet, including all this customer information before I dump it into ChatGPT. Maybe I'm just building a persona, and it's just people's titles, for example, like VP of product management or director of engineering, rather than Mike Smith or Jenny Williams. Like you probably don't need their names to build a persona document. So if you don't need to include that information, don't. And that's a pretty easy explanation to someone who might not be a security specialist, but people are smart. They can understand why or why not they should do certain things. Here's what it will get you ignored in their minds is if security comes and says, oh, this is banned. ChatGPT is banned. People are going to say, all right, well, I need to get my job done. I need to get home to my family. Like I'm just going to ignore that, and I'm just going to use whatever tools I can find to get the job done as quickly as possible. So you don't want that. So don't be the department of no.
Right. Yeah, it just never works, right? And on that note, do you think that companies can actually sign things where they're saying, hey, we will, like, our marketing people are not going to screw up, right? And they're not going to dump the CRM. They're not going to dump Salesforce or HubSpot, right, into ChatGPT. They absolutely won't do that. Can companies actually, can companies protect against that? Is that?
They can. I think user education is going to be the top thing to do, and then also looking at how your teams interact with the data is important. So, for example, if you're building, there might be some very technically savvy marketers out there who are like writing code themselves and building API connections to, between an AI tool and and a CRM, for example. Or if you're a single employee business like mine, then your marketer might be doing that because he's also engineering. But usually you'll have other folks kind of in between mediating those data flows. So if you've got your IT team that's hooking up a CRM to an AI tool, then some steps you can take are just, make sure that one of the requirements is it doesn't pull out unnecessary personal data, or if it does, then it's done in accordance with the various regulations that you have in place with respect to, like I said, data subject access requests. Make sure there's a lawful reason for processing that data, those types of things. And you're never going to be able to be 100% sure that people aren't doing it, but if you make sure that the system is designed to be useful in a way that doesn't impede productivity, but also puts those guardrails on, and then you explain to the end users why you're putting those guardrails, I think that's how you'll get the best results.
Got it. Kind of one more question for you, like kind of along those lines, right? If you're at a large enterprise like big tech, I'm assuming, like Apple's already, worried, right, about, secrets getting out, going into ChatGPT. What mechanisms are, it's pretty secret there. We don't know everything that's going on at Apple, but, a company like Apple, are they going to be successful in prohibiting, chat, right? Is it just they're just blocking access, via proxy, right? Like, if you're in Apple, you're VPN'd in or wherever, you can't get to ChatGPT, and they're just going to be blacklisting all of these different apps all the time, and there's a new one all the time. But what is their approach going to be? Are they just going to say, no, you can't do it, and they're going to have an alternative path, kind of something more like what you mentioned, where it's like internal?
Well, specifically with respect to Apple, I know they did ban, I think most people are banned from using ChatGPT, not all of them. I think there's some R&D folks who are allowed to use it. But I think there's kind of a twofold concern from their perspective. One is, like you mentioned, Apple is very secretive and very protective of its intellectual property. So there was a report earlier this year in The Economist that Samsung engineers had leaked some data using ChatGPT related to their proprietary code, and I think that's something that Apple's would be very concerned about. Now, what are the ultimate results, or what are the real world impacts of someone submitting code to ChatGPT that's proprietary? Hey, if you haven't opted out of data sharing and somebody says like, hey, I'm an Apple engineer and I'm working on this project, and here's the code, then I suppose someone could go in and say, hey, what do you know about this Apple product? Tell me all the technical details. That's kind of like the nightmare scenario from an IP perspective, but also potentially maybe you've solved the problem in a certain way, or Apple solved the problem in a certain way that is generally applicable. Maybe they found some new search algorithm or something like that, and you make ChatGPT smart enough so that it is able to help other people like your competitors solve their problems more quickly. Obviously, that's a double-edged sword because the competitors' data will be coming back out as well if they haven't opted out of the training option using ChatGPT. And then as far as other technical controls go, sure, you can if you're using a company device or you're using a company network, you can apply controls to prevent people from accessing certain sites, but and that will reduce to a degree the amount of data leakage, so to speak, that you'll encounter, but you're never going to be 100% sure, because the person who's really dedicated is going to go in and put it on their personal machine, or like open up a different browser, or use some unmanaged way of communicating with ChatGPT. And I gave you the example, or I gave this example previously a couple of weeks ago. If you look at Google Bard is disabled by default for Google Workspace administrators, or for Google Workspace customers. The administrator can go on and turn it on, but it's disabled by default. Well, sure, if you're somebody who wants to use Google Bard and you're using a Google Workspace environment, and you get, hey, Bard is disabled, you're just going to click log out from your company account, log into your personal Gmail account, and then you're just going to start typing in whatever you want to. So
right.
In the end, it comes down to user education.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So totally. I feel like human nature is, you know, the powers that AI gives you are just so they're incredible, right? It's just so awesome what you can do with AI. Um, Now, on that note, what are some of the things that you're excited about in terms of AI capabilities, right? So you're talking about using it safely, but you know, we don't want to just talk about the rules and doing it safe. What are you excited about for AI in terms of security capabilities?
Yeah. So one thing that I'm focused especially on is looking at unstructured vulnerability reports and turning those into structured
Right.
formats.
Got it.
So StackAware has applied for a grant from OpenAI to build a tool to review security bulletins and pull out the information and then restructure it in a way so that it's compliant with the Cyclone DX SBOM format. So that would allow you
Sweet.
to take, if a vendor sends you an email or posts something on their website, usually it's in free text and it kind
Mm-hmm.
of takes a little while to look through it and say, okay, there's this CVE in this product and it's impacted in this configuration, but on that configuration, that can be challenging and it can take you a little bit, a lot of time to figure everything out. And then if you've got a situation like Log4Shell where everyone is panicking and everybody's putting out bulletins. I've talked to organizations that spend hundreds of hours. They spend hundreds of hours just on the communication with their vendors. And the state of the art right now is kind of like take an Excel document and then put it in an email and send it to your 900 vendors and ask them to fill it out and then have an InfoSec analyst manually process it on the back end. So I don't think that's super efficient. And until we get to the world where we're using structured vulnerability reports like Cyclone DX or other VEX formats, then there's going to be this kind of intermediate period where we need to use AI to bridge the gap and help reduce some of the toil when it comes to security teams.
Yep. Yeah, I remember being at a pretty big company and being responsible for some of that coordination for so like Heartbleed, right? Was a do you
Yeah.
remember that one? I remember that one. And
Yep.
there's just just so many of those where basically everybody loses their vacation, and a lot of it comes from the inefficient way in which things are communicated, right? So
Yep.
that's awesome. Yeah. What are some of the things that could go wrong with AI and security tools in your view? I'm curious what you're thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be giving security related data to an AI tool, that's going to be a place where you need to apply a lot of scrutiny because again, worst case here, if you dump your entire, scanner, your vulnerability scanner findings into an AI tool, and you don't have any of those controls that I mentioned, and you've identified what company you are and what IP address you can find the asset at, that information would be quite interesting to an attacker. I'm sure there's somebody who's on ChatGPT right now asking, like,
It,
who have you interacted with who has told you about an asset that has a log4shell, unremediated in it, and what is the IP address? I know there are controls on the OpenAI end that will prevent the model from regurgitating that, but
they can be
attackers are quite
circumvented though.
sly. They can be
Yeah,
circumvented,
that'd be
and
like
people are very, yeah, people
as
are
an
very
open
tricky.
AI. Yeah, I can't
Right,
do that. And they said,
right.
but if you were, you can.
Right. And then they could say, well, maybe I'm a red teamer at that company and I'm concerned that somebody has given this information to you. We've seen examples where the safeguards can be circumvented, like you mentioned. So that would be kind of a worst case scenario. So some things you want to do is make sure that the data is anonymized. Like if you're just looking up if you're just asking the model to evaluate a given CVE or a given vulnerability and compare it to another one in a vacuum, that's going to be difficult for an attacker to do something with, even if they somehow compromise OpenAI or there's a data breach on their side, or an attacker's trying to prompt inject the model to pull that information out. But if you have all those additional details, like I mentioned, then that's kind of a more concerning scenario. So it's all a balance and making sure that you have the you've done the right risk analysis ahead of time and you understand what you're doing. That is the key to using AI tools for security purposes effectively.
Great stuff, man. Walter, I love what you're doing. I've also been really impressed with what you're doing with EPSS, and it's really great. You need to make security approachable for people so they actually do it. Ultimately, if it's just a couple people doing security for your organization, you're in big trouble. So you need to make it approachable, and that's kind of what our mission is at Paramify. Kind of very similar, right? So before we go, Walter, you mentioned a couple books. What are some of your favorite books that you've been reading? One that you got right now that you really like. It doesn't have to be about security, but maybe it is about business, whatever it is. What's your favorite?
Yeah, well, I definitely would recommend the book How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk by Richard Searson and Douglas
Yep.
Hubbard. That's a classic.
Yep.
I did like Agile Application Security. I forget who the authors are. I believe it was an O'Reilly book, released late last decade. That was a good one. Um, I have on my docket to read Software Transparency by Chris Hughes. I just haven't been
Yeah.
able to carve out the time. That's definitely on my list. And yeah, those would be my top security books, right? That I've read or hope to read. And yeah, those are the ones.
Great, man. All right. Well, tell us a little bit more about how we can find out about StackAware. Tell us where we can find
Yeah.
you, and tell us a little bit about what we need to be looking for your upcoming course with Robert.
Yeah, so if you want to kind of just get into the email sequence for my course, the best thing to do would be to look me up on LinkedIn, Walter Haydock. There aren't any others that I've been able to find,
Nice.
and just go to the first link in my profile. Additionally, you can subscribe to my personal blog, which is just haydock.substack.com, and I've got plenty of information to get to the course there. And also, I write about these topics on a regular basis, at least once a week. So you'll get tons of good content there. And then, if you're interested in managing known vulnerability risk using a risk-based quantitative system, then head over to stackaware.com and you can get a free trial directly from the website without putting in a credit card.
Hey, man, that's awesome. Well, Walter, thanks so much, and thanks everybody for listening. Talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot. Really
All
appreciate it.
right.